there, my name is Irene, and in this video, we're going to talk about Revit walls. Where do we find them? What parameters do we need to set up in order to create them? What do you eat them with? We're going to cover all the basics about walls, so let's get to it. Alright, so for this series of videos on the basics of Revit, I am going to be working with this little project here. This is a small commercial retail space that belongs to a bigger mall. I am posting in the description a link to the website from which I got it. I think I couldn't find who the author is, so if anyone knows who the author for this drawing is, by all means, feel free to share it with me. But yeah, this is the space that we're going to be working with. Pretty simple, pretty straight up. So as I introduce you to new concepts, what I'm going to be doing is that first I'm going to be creating them on the side just so we can explore their different properties. And then I'm going to apply those concepts to this project here so you can see a little bit of like, oh, this is how it would work in real life. And the first concept that we're going to be discussing is going to be walls. And walls are an interesting one because I find that the easiest way to understand walls is by working with a floor plan view and a 3D view at the same time, just so you can see the effect of what you draw. So right now I have my general floor plan open. If you're not sure where this name came from, you can check my previous video on levels. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to quickly open a 3D view, and then I'm going to drag that view to the side so I can have on one side my floor plan view, and on the other side I'm going to have my 3D view. So I'm going to put it there to the side. That's perfect. And now we're going to get started with our walls. So the wall command can be found on your architecture tab, and you're going to notice that under the wall command there's a little arrow. Whenever you see this little arrow, it basically means that the command has multiple options. And if I expand down here, you're going to see that, yep, there are multiple options. So you can create architectural walls, structural walls, walls by face, and then sweeps and reveals. Walls by face is something that it's going to be light years before we get that, because that requires us to discuss masses, which are a little bit more of an intermediate concept. Sweeps and reveals we're not going to be covering right now because they're not so much walls themselves, they are additions to our walls, or subtractions in some cases. So what I want to focus for the time being is the difference between an architectural wall and a structural wall. So remember, Revit is BIM software, and it is also an analytical tool. So what we are talking about when we're talking about an architectural versus a structural wall is a wall that carries a load, a structural load, versus a wall that is simply separating, dividing spaces. So the architectural walls in Revit are going to have load-bearing properties, and you're going to be able to do things to them. Like, for example, if it's concrete, you can put rebar in it. You can add, like, steel reinforcement. You can build up what is it that's happening structurally inside this wall. Architectural walls are just dividing walls. They could carry a load based on what their framing is, but they're not necessarily going to serve the analytical portion of like a structural design. So for us in interior design, all our walls are architectural. Unless the engineer comes and tells you that's a structural wall, don't touch it. You can just go ahead and draw all of your walls in Revit with architectural walls. So that's the one that I'm going to go for. And the quick key for architectural walls is WA. In fact, architectural walls are the default wall in Revit. So if I go WA, now here I have my wall. So what you're going to see here is that my cursor has now changed, and it's in kind of like placement mode, so to speak. And creating a wall is very straightforward. The first thing that you want to pay attention to is your modifications have changed. You are now on drawing wall mode. And what I want you to focus is on the drawing commands, because there's many different ways that you can draw a wall. So the default is a line where you have a start point and an end point. So I can click to start my point, and then see, I am creating my wall. And then your endpoint of the wall, you can either click somewhere on the screen or you can enter a distance. So for example, if I want this wall to be 20 feet, I can come here and type 20 feet, enter. And you're going to see that at the same time that my wall appears in my floor plan, it will also appear in my 3D view. Now, my 3D view will only update whenever I place a wall. So if I click a second time, that next wall will appear. It does not necessarily update in real time. This may depend on the properties of your computer or how many things you have going on. So this is one way of drawing walls with a line. Another option is any of these other forms. So for example, I could just make straight up a rectangle, or I can make a 3-point arc. So that's going to be a start, end, and then radius. So I can go and click here, then click here, and then create my curved wall. The other way to create a wall that I want to highlight at this point is this option here. to create a wall by picking lines. So this is going to be especially handy when you're working with references, because then instead of having to click, you can go here to pick lines and, for example, say, okay, see where this line is? Well, I want a wall there. And then all I have to do is click once, and Revit is going to put a wall for me there. So this is super handy when you're working with reference, although you need to do a little bit more setup for this to work with. If you change your mind and you have regrets, you can always go Control Z and that will undo that wall. Okay, but that is the basics for creating walls. But the thing here is that you didn't really get much of a choice with your walls. It just created these random wall here. So what kind of wall is it? How thick is it? How tall is it? You don't know any of the answers to this. So what I want to discuss now is how we can set up our walls, because what we want to do is we want to set up our walls before we create them. Okay, remember, we want to work with the parametric properties that Revit provides us. And if you're going to do that, it is much better to set up and then just start drawing. So to do that, I'm going to get rid of these guys. I don't actually need them. Ooh, one interesting thing that I want to point out before I delete all of this. I'm going to use this guy as an example. So by default in Revit, you can select just one thing at a time. So I can click here and I selected that wall, or I can click here and I can select that wall. If you want to select multiple walls, you can use all the methods that you're used to from AutoCAD. So for example, left to right selection box, you have to fully select the thing. Right to left, you only have to partially touch. You have control, you have shift to subtract. You know them, you love them. One particular selection option from Revit that I really like is the tab key. So if I hover over a geometry, I haven't clicked on it, I'm just hovering over it, and I press, not hold, just press the tab key once, what Revit is going to do is allow me to cycle through all of the selection options that are available at that particular point. And this is especially good when you have a very complex project, because you may be hovering over a surface where you may have walls, you may have floor, you may have windows, you may have doors, you may have a bunch of things that are stacked on top of each other. So instead of having to go like, am I selecting the right thing? You can just go tap, 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 tap. And that's going to cycle you through all of the options. So for example, here I tap and it selects all of the walls that are connected, and then I can delete them. Super handy stuff. Okay, so delete them and they're done. So getting back to setting up the properties of my wall before I start drawing. So there are going to be a couple of very important things that you want to consider. And the first things are going to be on this section here, on my optional properties, I think is the name of this guy. The first and most important is going to be your height. So your height is how high your wall is. And the thing is that by default in Revit, it is going to be unconnected. And this is a problem, because then that means that the height of your wall is not parametric. And if for whatever reason you change your mind and you want to change the height of that wall, then you're going to have to go picking up each and every wall in your project, and then you're going to have to manually change the height, which sucks. What you want to do is you want to set up the height of your walls to always be attached to a level. So in this case, I'm going to set up the height of my wall to go to my underslab. So I'm going to go US, and there you go. And in fact, you will know that you did things correctly, because if you check on the properties of your wall, you're going to see now that it's telling you that the base constraint is AFF. The base constraint is always going to be whatever floor plan you're on. So because I am on the floor plan that corresponds to my AFF level, my base constraint is AFF. But now you're going to see that my top constraint is going to be 8 feet, which is my underslab. Okay, so very, very important. Always make sure that you set up the height of your wall before you draw it. You can always change things afterwards, but it's a pain in the ass. So why would you do that to yourself? The other thing that is very important to set up is going to be your location line. So basically, the way that you want to think about this is that walls are 3D objects with a thickness. But when you are drawing them, you're basically drawing them as a line, right? You're clicking once, you're clicking twice. So because of that, Revit gives you the option of choosing where that reference line, that location line is. And by default, Revit has it set up for wall center line. And this is because Revit really loves engineers. And engineers make everything centered because of structural design. So wall center line is not going to work for interior design. So instead, what you want to do is you always want to work with finished face, because that's what we do. Like if you go to a room with a measuring tape and you start measuring that room, what you're doing is you're measuring faces, right? Like this is one face of the wall, this is another face of the wall. And then within finished face, you have two options, exterior and interior. Now, this is an interesting one, because the way that you tackle this is completely different depending on whether you're an architect or an interior designer. Architects care about the outside, interior designers care about the inside. The way that I can explain this is, I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to dimension a space, like go to a space and take the dimensions in real time. But it's very different if you're an architect versus if you're an interior designer. If you're an architect, you usually go and you first take the perimeter of the house or the building, because you care about the eases from the property line. So you're measuring from the outside in. When you're an interior designer, you are measuring the inside of the rooms. So you are measuring your walls from the inner side, and you don't care about what's happening on the outside. So the reason that this is going to matter is because later you're going to see that we can actually change the thickness of our walls. And what will happen is that your location line will remain constant, and then the thickness of the wall will push out and push in. So if your location line is incorrect, what's going to happen is that if you change your wall thickness, it will actually mess up the dimensions of your rooms. So very, very important as an interior designer, at least for your facade or your perimeter walls, you want to make sure that you're picking finish face interior. Okay? The rest of these settings are good the way they are. Chain basically means that it's almost like a polyline, where basically when you finish a segment, it goes to the next segment and it goes to the next segment. You can also create walls at an offset. So for example, if you're doing something like office spaces or hotel rooms, and you know that you need to have a specific distance, instead of having to input that number, you can just create walls directly at an offset. And then basically joint status is just going to allow the walls to basically like merge together. So you don't really need to mess up with any of these settings to begin with. And again, in later videos, I will go much more in depth into each and every one of these little settings. But as a beginner, somebody who's getting familiar with Revit, all you really care about is your height need to be parametric, and your location line has to correspond to who you are as a professional and what is it that you care about the project. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to go straight into drawing my wall. Okay. So it doesn't really matter where you, like if you go clockwise or counterclockwise, Revit doesn't care. So what's going to happen is, let's say that I'm going to start here. So I'm going to click. And what I want you to pay attention to is what of these two lines that I have in my AutoCAD reference I am using. In the context of my interior design project, this line corresponds to the interior side of my wall, and this line corresponds to the exterior side of my wall. So I am going to pick the interior line. Click. The other thing that I want you to notice is that my wall in Revit is thicker than my wall in AutoCAD. We will address that in a second. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to continue with my wall. Now, you can see that here we have a column, and you might be very tempted to just stop your wall here because the wall ends and a column comes. Except that Revit doesn't really work like that. In Revit, what you want to do is when you're drawing walls, because walls are going to be kind of like the perimeter of your project, you can ignore everything. You're just going to go crazy and draw those walls to fully enclose your space. Because what's going to happen is that depending on what geometry you're creating, it actually responds to the other things that exist. So in the case of columns, columns usually become integrated. They merge with your walls. So when you're drawing your walls, you can just go ahead and ignore your columns. I know some people are like super finicky about it and they want to stop it. You don't have to if you don't want to. So what I'm going to do in my case here, I'm going to ignore my column and I'm going to continue. Now, you can see that I made a little bit of a mistake. My wall is not perfectly aligned, which is giving me cancer, but don't worry, we're going to fix it in a second. So I'm just going to continue with my wall. And now what I want to do here is like thin line here and this thin line here. So that is indicating to me that there is a curtain wall system there. But curtain walls are their own super interesting topic in Revit. And what I want to do here for the time being is I want to ignore those curtain walls. And you're going to see why a little bit later. So I'm going to come here and once again, I'm just going to ignore everything, everyone. And I'm going to go, let's say, towards the center here. Perfect. Again, I'm going to have to fix the alignment of all of these walls. They're a mess. I'm going to bring it here and I'm going to bring it there. And you might be like, Jesus Christ, Irene, like, are you drunk? Like, these walls are a mess. And that's fine. Like, Revit is actually very forgiving when it comes to drawing stuff. You can change your mind. You can change parameters. You can fix things. You can adjust things. It's very forgiving in that sense. So let's see what some of those fixes look like. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to fix this gap here because this is supposed to be a closed space. And right now with this opening, like all the raccoons are going to get into my retail store through this opening here. So if I want to fix this, I'm going to fix it on the floor plan just because it's a little bit easier. I'm going to make this view just a little bit smaller. So if you want to fix it, there's a very handy command in your modifications, which is trim. Trim in Revit is a little bit interesting. You actually have a couple different iterations of trim. So you have the default trim, which is quick key TR. And basically what this trim does is either extends or cuts two lines to make sure that they connect. So if you have two lines that are going past each other, it's going to cut them so they end at the same point. And if you have two lines that are not touching each other, it will extend them. So it's kind of like a multi-purpose command. You also have trim extend single element. So this is more like the traditional trim or extend, sorry, that you would find on something like AutoCAD, where you're selecting a line and then you're saying, okay, you're going to extend until you touch this line. And another really nice one is multiple elements. So in this case, you can select one kind of like guideline and then say you, all of you guys are going to extend until you reach that line, which is very nice. But in my case, I'm going to be using the TR basic trim. So TR trim, and I'm going to click on one wall, click on another wall. It gives you a little preview of where they're going to connect, which I think is very nice. And voila, now they are connected. Beautiful. Okay, so that's thing number one. We've closed the gap. Thing number two is that my alignment sucks. There's no other way of saying it. But I have a bigger problem, which is that I can't really see the AutoCAD drawing because my walls are kind of hiding it. And this makes sense, right? Like the AutoCAD drawing is on the floor and the walls are sitting on top of it. So the walls are obstructing my floor plan. So the solution here, there's a couple of different methods, but I want to keep it very, very simple. The easiest thing you can do is simply change your style. So we talked about style in a previous video. You're going to find it on the bottom left corner. I'm also going to change my level of detail to fine. And what I can do is while I'm working with my CAD reference, I can switch to wireframe. So that way I don't see faces. I only see the lines. So see, I can still see my Revit wall, but now I can also see the AutoCAD drawing below. So we said that this wall was fine in terms of placement. The thickness is still messed up, but we're going to tackle that later. But this guy here is messed up. See, it should be a little bit closer. So to fix this one, I'm going to use the Align tool. It's this guy over here, quick key AL. And basically what the Align tool is going to do is allow you to align two objects to the same place. So when you're using the Align tool, quick key AL, the first element that you click on is going to be the guide. So if I pick my AutoCAD line, then what's going to happen is that anything that I click will align to that guide. So I'm going to align it. Now you're going to notice this little lock here. I'm not going to click on it. So this lock basically links two objects together. So that would basically mean that if later I move the AutoCAD line, this wall will follow. Now this can be a fantastic tool in some scenarios, but the way that I want you to think about this is that my AutoCAD drawing is serving simply as a reference. As soon as I'm done drawing this architectural shell, I will delete the AutoCAD drawing. I don't need it in the long term. This is not a live construction drawing. The building already exists. It was already built. I'm just drawing my own design in it. So because of that, I will not be locking these walls to the CAD drawing because the CAD drawing is going to go away soon. Now, this one here is a little bit trickier because I don't have a reference here on the inside. What I do have is a reference on the outside. Basically, my wall should end where the columns are. So I'm going to click this time on my column at the top and then on the wall. And then same thing on this column here and this wall. And voila! Now all of my walls are perfectly aligned with my reference. Great! Except not really, because I still need to fix my thickness and I also want to talk about wall types. So the first thing that I want to discuss is that the wall that I started with is a generic wall. In fact, again, I'm going to go tap to select all of my walls and click on them. You can see that it is a basic wall generic 8 inches. And I really love this wall. This wall type. I'm going to explain a little bit why later. But especially if you are getting started with Revit, drawing with this kind of wall can be a little bit confusing because it's the same on both sides. So you don't really know what's the inside and what's the outside. So my recommendation is that if you're getting familiar with Revit, what I would recommend is that you draw with any of these exterior walls. And the reason for it is that they're usually going to have like a brick pattern on the outside that is going to make it very, very obvious if you are messing things up. So for example, if I set this guy to exterior brick and CMU on metal stud, you're going to immediately see, could not enter, that's okay. You're going to immediately see like, oh, okay, so we have the outside and then we have the inside. It's very clear. It's very obvious. So if you're getting started with Revit, I actually like working with this guy just because then it becomes very, very obvious if you're doing things right. So now let's say that you made a mistake and one of your walls is looking the wrong way. This can happen to anyone. So if you want to fix the direction of a wall, you can do that by selecting the wall. And then you're going to notice that it has this like double arrow going up up and down or left and right. And this basically allows you to flip the sides of the wall. So pay attention to what's happening here. If I go here and I click, you're going to see that now the white side is like on the outside and the brick and stuff is on the inside. The orbit really sucks because of the CAD reference that I brought. See, I flipped it inside out, so to speak. So if you draw a wall wrong, this is one easy way to fix it. You can just flip it. Now, keep in mind, if your mistake is with the location line, what's going to happen is that when you go to flip your walls, they're no longer going to be aligned with your CAD reference. So you have to be very, very careful about that. Look at how I changed this wall, and this is a much, much thicker wall, but my location line is still exactly where my CAD drawing is. That's why your location line is so important. If you need to change your location line, you can do that in the properties here. See, you can see location line, finish face interior, and you can switch it here. So again, one thing that I really like about Revit is that it is kind of very forgiving. It's going to allow you to do changes at any step of the road. Okay. So that's the first thing that I wanted to point out. But let's say like we're going to go back to our generic wall. So I'm going to select all of them here and I'm going to go back to, I think it was generic 8 inches. So the next thing that I need to do is I need to fix this thickness because this is super important. I've seen this in real life and I have a mini stroke whenever I see it. In construction documentation, there is no such thing as good enough. There is no such thing as, yes, the wall is thick enough for the drawing. No. If the reference tells you a thickness, your wall has to be that thickness. It is not optional, okay? So it is very important that the thickness of my Revit wall matches the thickness of my reference. So what is the thickness of my reference? I don't know. I need to take a dimension to figure it out. So I already mentioned that. If you want to quickly dimension something, you can go on your top menu. You're going to find Align Dimensions, and the quick key is DI. Now I'm going to be able to measure. But if I come to measure, you're going to see that I'm getting these kind of like dotted line. And this is not a bug. This is a feature. Again, Revit really loves engineers and architects. By default, your Revit is going to want to measure only the middle of the walls because that's where the core is. If you want to change this, what you're going to do is while you still have the dimension open, the dimension command open, if you check the properties, here you can see modify place dimensions. And by default, it is set up to wall center line. So what I can do is expand this menu and say, I want wall faces. So when I click there, I see now it allows me to pick the wall face. So I'm going to pick this guy here, and then this is my AutoCAD wall. Click there. And okay, this is the measurement that is given. Now, this gibberish of a number here is a clear sign that we are working with metric. This original drawing is in millimeters. Now, does that mean that we need to change our unit system to metric? No. This is something that, look, this is going to happen whether you want it or not, especially if you work in Canada. We are particularly cursed with the fact that we need to know all of the measurements at the same time in all of the unit systems. So you can just work with this here. In some cases, they will sometimes round it up. So instead of being 5 and 2932, you can round it up to 6. Again, I don't like that because then you're not being precise. But in some places, they're like, well, if we're going to build it here, it's going to be 6 inches. It's not going to be metric, right? So here I will give you some leeway. I personally like that number to be what the number actually is. And I think that this other wall here, I think that they're all the same thickness. Yeah, they're all the same thing. So that is going to take me to my last step, which is going to be changing the thickness of the wall. And this is going to be where I talk about generic walls and why I like them so much. Because the thing is, there's a couple things to consider here. Number one, generic wall is usually going to be the kind of wall that you start with because it's what we call a placeholder. So basically, if I come here and I expand on these walls here, you're going to see that I have a couple different exterior walls. I have a foundation wall. I have a couple of interior walls. I have a retaining wall. I have a soffit. But here's the thing. If I ask you, hey, based on what you look at, what is this wall made of? What is it? Is it concrete? Is it brick? Is it, is it metal studs? Is it wooden studs? Is it made out of Dorito Crunch? I don't know. I cannot know just by looking at the CAD drawing. And the thing is that unless you were on site and you dig a hole and you did an inspection to determine what those walls actually were, in a lot of cases, you're just given a floor plan and may God have mercy on your soul. You don't really know what the wall is made of. So generic wall is fantastic because it means that you don't need to answer that question or now. Later, when you go on a site visit and you confirm this wall is concrete and this wall is metal stud with drywall, then you can actually change the wall, because this is the thing that is really nice about Revit. You can change things at any point. So I could later come and say, well, this wall here is going to be a brick wall, and this wall here is actually supposed to be an interior 6 1/8 of an inch dry wall with a metal stud. You can change your mind at any point. Revit will allow it. But while I do not know what my walls are made of, generic is the way to go. And the other reason that I really like working with generic walls is because changing their thickness is very, very easy. So we're going to go into a lot more depth about these in future videos. So for now, I'm just going to talk about changing wall thickness. Now, you may notice that wall thickness is nowhere here on my wall properties. And that is because your wall thickness is not an instant property. Remember, the properties that you see here are the properties of the individual. So these properties correspond to this wall, but then this wall could have different properties. Thickness is a type property. It's something that affects all of the walls that are the same type. And therefore, in order to change it, we have to go to the edit type command. So I'm going to go here, and that's going to open this window here. Oh, it's looking gigantic. So let me make it a little bit more discreet. Very nice. And you're going to see here that there is my wall thickness, here referred to as my wall width. But you're going to notice that this value is grayed out. And if I try to click on it, it's not going to let me do anything. And that is because of something that I mentioned in a previous video, which is the fact that walls are not just regular families. Walls are what we refer to as system families. Basically, this is going to be walls, floors, ceilings, roofs. Yeah, I think those are the main ones. And basically the way that, and curtain walls, but they're also walls. And basically the way that it works is that these elements are not just a single geometry that you change, but instead they're going to be made out of layers. Like, again, for example, if you think about a wall is not just like a block that you just put and you're done. You're going to have your drywall, you're going to have your studs, maybe you have some insulation, maybe you have a vapor barrier, maybe you have some masonry, maybe you have like something and something and something. So in Revit, you cannot just change the thickness of a wall. Instead, what's going to happen is that the thickness of your wall will be a result of how many layers you have and how thick those layers are. But because we're just getting started with Revit, I'm not going to torment you with the layers and their properties and their placement and whatnot, which is why I also really like generic walls, because generic walls have a single layer, the generic layer. Not very realistic, but very easy to work with. So if you want to change your wall thickness, what you're going to do is you're going to go here where it says structure and then edit. And here you're going to see the thickness of your wall. So see, 8 inches. But before I edit this guy, I'm actually going to close this window because I have something very important to mention. And that is that you never, under any circumstances, for the love of God, mess up with the original. This wall is generic 8 inches, and by the day that you die, this wall should still be in your project. If you want to create your own customized spin-offs, Frankenstein geometry, you are always going to duplicate. And again, these may sound silly because it's like, Jesus Christ, Irene, you can just go back to 8 inches. But this is just a mentality that you want to get used to when working with Revit, because what's going to happen is that later we're going to get into other families. And what may happen is that you may screw up an original family, and then that's it. You're screwed, because if the family is in the original Revit library, now every time that you load that into a new project, it's going to come messed up. So it is just good practice to get used to the idea that you just don't mess up with originals, and instead you always duplicate whenever you want to make changes. So I'm going to come here to duplicate, and this is going to make a copy of the generic 8 inches. And I can call it whatever I want. I can call it my custom wall, pretty wall, awesome super mega wall. What I find the most helpful is just to put what is the new thickness that you're going to be working with. So let's say we're going to go 5 and then 2932. Yes, I'm going to be that anal, and I'm going to go exactly with the dimensions, and this is going to be my new wall. Now, keep in mind, I just created a new wall type. The thickness is still the same. So after I create my new wall type, now I can come here to edit, and I can say, okay, you're not going to be 8 inches. You're going to be 5 space 29/32 inches. If you don't put inches and you press enter, it's going to make it 5 feet. You don't want that. So I'm going to press enter. There's a lot of information going on here, and I want you to make your best effort to ignore all of it. As someone who's getting just familiar with Revit, you don't need all these details. You're going to tackle those details at a different time in life. So I change my thickness, I go OK, I go apply, I go OK. And what you're gonna see is that nothing has changed, and that is because I have not selected all of my walls. Only one of them changed. See? So if I select this guy is my new wall type, while these guys are still the generic 8. So once again, I'm gonna go tab to select all of my walls, and now see how it's telling me you have multiple walls selected. So now I can come here and say, okay, all of you are going to be my new generic wall. Here it is, generic 5-inch 2932. There you go. Ooh, this guy's a little bit off now because remember, my placement line was the interior face, so that means that this guy should. See how important it is where your location line is? So for example, for this guy here, I could come here and say like, you know what? Your location line should be the exterior because you're going to be aligned with that column. And if anything ever changes, I want to make sure that you remain aligned with that column. So I'm going to go align, align. And then same thing here. I want this other wall here to be location line exterior. And then I'm going to go align, align. And there we go. Beautiful. I no longer need this dimension, so let's do a little bit of housekeeping and get rid of it. And if I go back to my hidden line, now you can see your nice little box has been created. Yay! And with that, we have reached the end of this video. As you can see, walls in Revit require a lot of setup, but then you can create them really, really fast. The other advantage is that, again, Revit is very forgiving about you changing your mind as long as you have set up things correctly. So I hope you find this video helpful. If you have any questions, by all means, feel free to leave them in the comments. Please like the video. Also, it would be nice if you subscribe. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining in. Thank you very much for sticking through, and I will see you in the next one. Have a good one. Bye.